Welcome to the Darnell and Cody Show, where we talk about social, political, and philosophical issues currently relevant to us as society. Today we have a special guest talking about disinformation and interference in political elections, and his name is Jerry. So Jerry, please go ahead and why don't you go and define exactly what we mean by interference and disinformation first.
Well, Cody, thanks for the intro. One of the things that takes place, especially in the modern context, is that we have people, foreign actors, using electronic means to basically sow discord in our electoral process. The most notable of these has been the Russian disinformation campaign, spearheaded by the Internet Research Agency in the 2016 U.S. election. And basically what you do is you find fault lines, and you use sort of distinct playbook where you find fault lines and exploit them ruthlessly to have a desired political outcome. In this case, boosting a preferred candidate to basically and also deter the election of somebody you don't really want. So in this case, elevate Donald Trump and disadvantage Hillary Clinton. We also see this in practice in other ways. Domestically, we've had media manipulation efforts since the creation of mass media. Everything from the Willie Horton ad to Karl Rove has also used some sort of media manipulation that's a really creature of the modern public relations industry. And I look forward to delving into both.
All right, well, excellent. I guess my first question would be really who are the actors on political disinformation and kind of interference? Do we have any major players? Obviously, I think many people are going to be familiar with your answers here, but just to get us started off on everything.
Depends. I think what happens is you have in 2016 it was primarily the Russians. In 2020, reports indicate that it may be the Chinese as well as the Iranians in addition to the Russians. Each distinct party wants different outcome. The Russians allegedly, and this is allegedly, but this is backed up by a bipartisan Senate report, really seek to maintain the Trump presidency, keep him in office. Whereas the Chinese, who are aggravated by his trade war, as well as by his robust foreign policy response to their incursions in Asia, particularly the South China Sea, would like to see him removed from office. The same with the Iranians, who have seen a much more forceful U.S. response to their aggression abroad. And so what happens is you have China and Russia who maybe want to influence voters to remove the current president, and then you also have Russia who wants to keep him in office. So so in addition to whatever special interests and political interest groups may seek to influence politics domestically, you now have the added interests of foreign bodies, which is something I think very new, right? This is something, we've had Soviet Russia, have active measures during the Cold War, but the idea in a modern election that foreign countries may do what we have done in the past to other countries is kind of frightening.
Right. So misinformation is the key way of interference, particularly through social media, but also through mainstream media, like you mentioned. Fake news is nothing new. It's been around, forever in politics. And something like yellow journalism comes to mind. Is something that happened recently, relatively speaking. But whereas before we had one big lie, these days we seem to be bombarded with fake news, overwhelmed by it. Part of it is because we have this surplus of data, but we also have our own domestic operatives, like you mentioned, spreading misinformation to spread their propaganda or just to generate profit from sensitized headlines. So what do you think is the way to separate domestic misinformation from foreign misinformation, and is there a point in trying to separate them?
Well, I think you really have to determine the source, because there's stylistic differences, but there's also intentionality and goals behind them, right? Everyone's trying to accomplish a given political goal, but the intent behind it is that what is the desire of the party and what is the intent behind it. For example, Roger Stone, in order to sort of feed this right-wing base, cultivated a relationship with radio host Alex Jones. Right, Alex Jones, of course, is known for denying the Sandy Hook massacre, and saying it was a product of crisis actors. And also, he is a known quantity in the political realm since the Nixon administration. And what you have here is the allegation is that he almost gleefully accepted this sort of role on the part of the Russians to really influence the political landscape of the country. Now, there isn't really a point in separating the foreign and the domestic because they all want the same thing. There's a meeting of the minds, to borrow a term from the law, of domestic actors and foreign actors wanting a distinct political outcome. Roger Stone wanted to get his candidate elected, and so did the Internet Research Agency, which was an extension of the Russian intelligence service in Vladimir Putin. Right? They wanted a given political outcome. The difference is the source, right? But there's it's a series of lines. You can draw. It's really about two. You need 2 points to make a line, but there's an intersection in the outcome that is desired. Does that make sense?
Right, absolutely. You answered it very well. Cody, you have another question?
Yeah. So we obviously know that there are two different kinds of actors here, as you've easily just summed it up for us with domestic and international. So my question is, if we can't really distinguish between the two, how do you address it all at once? Because from my perspective, I would think that maybe you could try and address like the international stuff as just direct foreign interference. Be like, hey, foreign countries, you're not allowed to do this. This is just like in blatant obstruction to our democracy. So if you do this, there's going to be a punishment of some kind. Whereas domestic, it seems like that's more close to freedom of speech itself. So I don't know if you want to touch on that at all before we actually address the solutions themselves there. But
Well, yeah, I think that you have to look at it more holistically, right? You have to look at the response to vetting information. I think the important thing is to have a robust civic culture of defining and rooting out this stuff. I think of two things, right? The domestic and foreign response is one that can be done without using, say, the force of violence or force. For example, in Eastern Europe, there's a robust culture of rooting out Russian disinformation due to the fact that they are on Russia's doorstep. So you look at places like Estonia and Latvia and Ukraine, there are entire TV news programs dedicated to debunking this stuff, right? So they actually have Sunday talk shows where they say, this is the latest Russian crackpot theory. Here are the facts, and here's how to actually spot it. So there's even in like the Czech Republic, they have volunteer brigades of like cyber warriors, so to speak, like people who troll the trolls. So other governments that have been exposed to this stuff and have had longer and more skeptical relations with Russia have a better tailored response, both domestically and then internationally. In the United States, and with regards to the international portion, we actually have a template to work with. In the 1980s, there was this thing called the Active Measures Working Group, which was a product of the Reagan administration. So during the 1980s, the Russian disinformation machine really reached a fever pitch when they planted a story in an Indian newspaper alleging that the AIDS virus was cooked up by the United States military in Maryland, in one of our research labs. So what the Reagan administration did was it tasked a panel of experts to basically go on C-SPAN and also put pressure on the international community through authoring reports and basically, robustly debunk this stuff. And eventually, their reports actually landed in the hands of Gorbachev, who basically recanted and apologized for it. So there is a template for saying that this stuff works, right? That basically, if you have a culture where you basically, put the money and the effort behind it, you can absolutely get, reinforced democratic norms that push this stuff out of the ecosystem. And that's important. I think that it's been done before with regards to the AIDS story from the Soviets, but also domestically with regards to how other countries deal with the plague of disinformation. as I stated.
I really like that answer because it doesn't interfere with people's direct freedom of speech, which is promised by the Constitution here. So,
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go in with gun like the Postal Service and the IRS may have like guns and stuff, but you don't need to say, "Oh, you're a 12-year-old who just retweeted a fake news story. We're going to throw you in jail." No, you don't really need to go that far. I think that would be an overreaction. You just have to. I mean, ultimately, disinformation is a tool for the information battle space, the realm of persuasion. So you have to fight on those terms, right? Having an overarching response that limits people's freedom, plays into the hands of people who you're trying to influence. But it all they might say, "Wow, the government really is tyrannical," right? You just need to reach people, and you also have to have credibility. I think there needs to be a robust bipartisan response to this thing, and I think that eventually it will reach a fever pitch. Maybe that's naive, but at the end of the day, what you have to come to the conclusion is that a foreign actor's interference in our electoral process through the propagation of lies. It's not just fake news. It's lies. Has to be met. Has to be met as not as an attempt to overthrow a political candidate, which is what people on the right thought the Russia story was. Right? They're just saying this because they don't like Donald Trump. Ergo, we're going to deny the story because it's in our political interest to deny it. Right? So you have to really sort of reach across and understand where they're coming from, but you also have to understand that it's in the national interest to really address this issue because it may be in your interest today to close cover your ears and go la 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 to protect your candidate. But what happens when another actor is doing something that is manifestly against your political interest? And that's what's happening with the Chinese, right? They have a global network of television stations, a global television network called CGTN, an English language broadcasting service that they use to get their message across. And it's very, very, very potent. You have them actually denying the existence of Uyghur facilities, right? The Uyghur story with regards to the million or so Uyghur Muslim minorities in Xinjiang province that are actually being detained in quote re-education and training camps, right? You have NGOs and you have policymakers in the West saying this is going on. Then you have CGTN effectively pushing back. The very, very, very well written, English language broadcasts and press releases saying you're full of it. This is not what's going on. This is what the Chinese party line is, and they're very good at what they're doing. And so if you turn a blind eye to what the Russians are doing, eventually you're also opening up the floor to people like the Chinese who have a lot deeper pockets to really spread this stuff around.
Right. And I think that's when you're trying to separate the domestic and the foreign. But like you said, also that there is no point in trying to separate them, right? Because
it blends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the age of the internet, I mean, it all blends seamlessly.
Right. And so there's no real point to trying to distinguish them because they both have their maligned actors and intentions. So what I would kind of want to point out was though the future is bleak in many ways because having a democratic or politically engaged population, which I think is your way of solution, right, relies on a public that sufficiently cares. But it's hard in our current climate because our population right now, they have no stake in politics. So we have to fix domestic hardships first in the common American household before we can reasonably expect them to get engaged politically. Like Russian fake news, for instance, is not going to be on top of the common man's mind. Like they're more concerned with like I gotta make rent, I gotta get food on the table.
Yeah.
So I think the real issue is we have to first get our population on their feet before we can ever reasonably explain them to have a civic participation, like you're saying.
Well, I think so too. I mean, I think that one of the things is that there has to be a cooling of tensions with regards to the polarization, which I don't see happening in the immediate frame, the immediate time frame. But I do think that if you look at the Reagan era and you do look at the Cold War, right, you had a population that was much more receptive to mobilizing sort of due to Cold War anxieties, right? So you had a population. If you look at the sort of propaganda videos released in the 1950s, you had people much more, attuned to recognizing, almost to the point of hysteria, the threat of communist propaganda. And by the 80s, there was still, and especially with the late Cold War sort of enthusiasm on the right in particular about beating back the evil empire. There's a lot more domestic, enthusiasm for pushing back against negative messaging about the United States. But I think the key distinction with the AIDS story versus the present thing is that there's an angle of they're making us look bad overseas and they're trying to divide us at home. In this frame, it's just about domestic division, and I think it's also got the additional lever is, at least as far as Trump is concerned, it's about if you accept as a basis for you accept the notion that the Russians interfered using disinformation, even if it wasn't as big as people, even if it was just the Internet Research Agency and Facebook ads, you have to understand that people will see that as a way of delegitimizing their preferred candidate. And there were a slew of millions of Americans who voted for the man, and so that's why they're not picking up on it. There's no cross-party appeal for this, specifically because it advantages one group. There's a perception that it advantages one group over the other. So it's not just about a disengaged political culture. It's also about a zero-sum game with regards to the reception of this, this problem.
Right, and you mentioned.
It was actually,
go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
so
you mentioned.
I was going to throw in like QAnon as well, because like it's pretty much exactly what you're talking about, and like now we have a political candidate who actually was elected in the Senate, I believe, or maybe the Congress or the House of Representatives. Sorry, but she's actually like firmly believes all this stuff, and so I mean, this is just like the worst case scenario type of disinformation stuff, where you have one political party that's kind of trying to say like everybody is just controlled by like sadists and pedophiles and stuff. Like to me, that's just like so hard to even counter once someone has gotten to that point. So like, I don't know, Darnell wants to top this off or whatever, but like, how do you even reach someone when they're that disinformed and that like disaffected by everything to the point where like they're that far? Can you reach somebody like that?
I think that it takes time. I mean, look, I think that the problem is that as I always say, I'm an optimist. I think that QAnon and the sort of Alex Jonesization of, and I use that term as sort of the sort of hypnosis of a large part of our population that is socially isolated and economically vulnerable, which is a product of the sort of modern, postmodern economic and social order. Is a real problem. But I will say this: I mean, conspiracy theories and sort of negligible stories that have negligible basis in fact have been reproduced in media since the dawn of the printing press. And I think that if you look at like you mentioned earlier, the yellow journalism, which was a thing that happened was coined in the 19th century due to the texture of the paper, I believe, right? I mean, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong. Maybe that's fake news. But they basically the penny press, what they did is they coined the term remember the Maine, right? So this idea that a U.S. warship had been blown up in Havana Harbor as an act of war. And they beat the drumbeat for war on the basis of, something that was kind of a lie. Sound familiar? Going to war on the basis of a lie. And the answer is it actually was a coal fire, or like some sort of issue with the coal furnace that caused an explosion that caused the ship to be destroyed in Havana Harbor. So this sort of idea, the difference is the scale and the the scale of transmission. We live in an age where we are gripped by a pandemic. The other pandemic is the fact that we have an information superhighway that basically is allows our citizens to mainline this crap into their psyches.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make the parallel there. Tehran and Trump, and then Maine and the shimp you mentioned, which both, like, Trump jumped to the conclusion there was a foreign attack. And so it's just kind of funny that you made that parallel.
Well, yeah, but remember the main. Yeah, it's interesting because if you are you talking? Is there a current story about Trump and Tehran? I'm missing the point.
The Tehran, or I mean, the blast in Tehran, I believe, where
Lebanon.
Yeah, Lebanon. I thought it was the city of Tehran in Lebanon. I might be misinformed.
No. See, no, it was a city in Lebanon where the ammonium nitrate thing happened.
Exactly. So that wasn't a terrorist attack or anything like that. Similar type of thing. It's just an interesting parallel I was making.
Yeah, that was in Beirut.
Yeah, thank you. Because they left ammonium nitrate in very poor storage. I mean, I've heard people actually talk about that. Former government officials. One former government official said to me, "I wonder if there's something more to the story there, because basically in order to ignite the stuff, you'd have to have an open flame, right, or a spark of some sort. So it really makes you think." But that's exactly the problem. It's all speculation. There's no basis in fact. And if he has access to the intelligence reports, he should know better. And if he does have access to the intelligence reports, he should shut the fuck up, if you pardon my French. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Darnell, though.
All right. I just wanted to tag on with our previous one about division. So division and misinformation kind of go hand in hand. You can say division is the goal of misinformation, or one of the goals at least. And division is another big tool they have at their disposal, the domestic or foreign entities that want to interfere with our democracy, or just generally have malignant intentions. Given the U.S.'s dynamism and multiculturalism and racial diversity, we're more susceptible to division than, I say, Sweden or Korea, countries that are very homogeneous. And divisions could be propped up ideologically anywhere, but only in a place like the U.S. could we really have this sort of massive racial division over something completely superficial. Both domestic and foreign entities take advantage of this, but how effective of a strategy is it, for one? And is there a viable path to protect ourselves from them exploiting this, I don't want to say weakness, but this factor that we have?
I think that it's interesting you say that, because I think that the U.S. has an open sore, right? You guys did a podcast on Black Lives Matter. You know that race relations in this country, indeed throughout the Americas, particularly in the United States, are an open wound. And I think that it's a fault line that people, both domestic, politicians and media outlets, as well as foreign actors, seek to manipulate for their own ends. I think it's just an easy target. Race baiting is as old as as America, in a sense. I mean, you look at it in the Reconstruction era and in the abolition era, as well as through the present. People just exploit the differences between black and white for their own end, for fear and for whatever reason. In the immediate sense, I think that it's easier to call it. You have to have leadership, right, to really transcend that kind of thing, right? I think that the DNC was the vice president's speech was a very interesting moment because it called people to action. Not everyone, wanted to sort of, pick up the mantle of it, but it's easier to appeal to unity and to sort of, America's, civic rituals, which transcend those merely skin deep, differences. So I think that we have strength in that, even though we are different, but e pluribus unum. That being said, it's easier said than done. I think that it's just so easy, and there's just so much there that it's so easy to just exploit, because there's so many things in ways that racism is reflected, right? I mean, one of the things is like microaggressions, the criminal justice system, all of these things that are mentioned, on social media and elsewhere, and in the press, and then of course the backlash to it in conservative media and the back and forth. it's just so easy to play on that for your own ends to keep people divided. So I don't see that type of thing ending anytime soon. But I think that using it for as long as people, whether your name is Lee Atwater or Donald Trump, I don't see that lever is going to go away anytime soon. If domestic politicians are going to resort to it, what makes you think that foreign actors won't either? So I think that there's a way to take us to the next level in terms of being a better country and sort of really sort of purging open racism and dog whistling from our political culture. But I don't see it happening in the immediate term, let alone my lifetime. I'm sorry to be skeptic, but I just see that those differences are just too easy to exploit by bad people. I know I'm sorry to be I'm usually optimistic, but I just that's just my perspective.
All right, and do you have a follow-up question to that, Cody?
I mean, I was just going to say I pretty much agree with your position there. I mean, I just don't see how we can get past it, at least in this generation. But I mean, I do think going back to a point that Darnell made earlier, it really seems like in order for us to even mobilize against what's happening with the disinformation and everything, we have to address the root cause of why people aren't even paying attention to that. And again, it seems to me the focus on something more up in your face, like getting your kid food or paying for rent. A lot of people are struggling, and as you mentioned, there's that class divide now where people that were working class, out in the Midwest, for instance, have really been hurt by the new economy as we know it. And those are the kind of people who are looking for something else. They were the ones who are willing to go for Trump and give him a chance at least, although many of them, especially the farmers, seem to be unhappy with him now. But it doesn't seem to me well,
I would say that I've read reports in the Guardian and elsewhere and other places that indicate that some of the places that flipped from Obama to Trump are still firmly in his hands. But it depends. I think that he has his appeal. But to answer your question, I want to sort of confront this notion that people are too distracted with their everyday economic survival to really be taking part in the political process, because I don't think that's really true. I think that they do in their own way. I think that maybe not as cerebrally as maybe not in the sort of technical way that is necessary to sort out this stuff. I mean, plenty of people who have what the new term we have, economic anxiety, are still engaged, right? So plenty of people who are worried about their economic futures are engaged in the political process. The kind of people that voted for presidents, since FDR to Reagan to Obama, right? Plenty of working people say are paying attention. The difference is keeping their attention focused, past an election, and not letting the broader public be fooled by politicians and slick PR campaigns that seek to divert their attention from the real issues. And I think that that's crucial, right? People are worried about their survival, and they are paying attention to what their leaders do. The difference is whether or not they are whether or not they're receiving the correct information to actually make an informed choice, or whether or not they're simply falling prey to appeals to emotion. So I think that it is different, right? And I think that.
Well, I would say that that awareness you're talking about kind of it has to kind of relies on are you educated enough to even be aware of this? Are you have that awareness factor? Are you critical thinking? Do you have the critical thinking abilities? And you said that a lot of people they do face economic strifes and they do still vote. But that's actually still less than the majority of the population. Half the people in this country don't even vote to begin with. So we already are at a huge disadvantage before we even bring in do the people that vote, are they economically stable or not? So even then, we're already saying we're already 10 steps behind before we can even meet the threshold, I would say, to have a politically aware population. So I think that's a much more optimistic look that you have there in comparison to the reality, which is half the people don't care, period. Like, they're not even engaged politically. And then the people that are engaged, I would say a lot of them were not really, they don't care about Russia and they don't care about China. They're saying, well, what's the guy that's going to get elected going to do for me as an individual? And a common argument is that no matter who's in power, salaries are stagnant, things are getting more expensive. My road outside, the pothole in my street isn't fixed. Doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. Well, who's going to fix this? Who's going to make my life actually better? And I think as a country, we have failed the working class. As a country, our leadership at least has failed the working class. And it's gotten to a point where I don't think they have no incentive to really care if they're getting fed fake news or not, because nothing really changes. So unless we fundamentally attack the real rooted problems, socioeconomic issues that we're facing as a nation, or at least the working class is facing, these problems aren't going to be fixed at all. Or it's not, even if they are fixed, it's not going to be meaningfully fixed, because what's the end game here? We want a healthier, stronger, more prosperous society for all, and that's just not happening.
Yeah, sure. I think that's an excellent point. I think that previous generations have been more well equipped to root out foreign propaganda, in particular because there's a stronger economic base behind it, right? There was more. I mean, I think that you had the backdrop of the Cold War for one thing, but you also had more egalitarian political culture. I think what did Paul Krugman call it? The Great Compression. Let me look this up. I want to say the Great. Yeah, and that was a period. Was called the Golden Age of American capitalism, right? And that was the period of wage compression. Following the Second World War, right? And so, income distribution became shrank considerably in the period following the Second World War on through the 70s into the 80s, right? It reached its apex. This period reached its apex in like the 60s, right? And this is something Robert Reich, former Secretary of Labor, talks about. But yeah, I mean, I agree with the premise by and large that you can't really root out the issue of fake news until you deal with the underlying anxieties that necessarily decrease people's ability to vet their sources. But I will say that with a caveat, right? I've met plenty of people who are pretty well heeled that choose to disregard rational, factual information. There are plenty of, rich baby boomers who choose to follow the president despite all indications that he's full of it, and that a lot of things are completely untrue, but they feel correct.
Right, and I 100% agree with you that, anecdotally speaking, I know the same people you're talking about, and I myself would probably be included in that group. Like, I'm not doing economically very well, but I'm still politically engaged as much as I can. But the flip side, I guess, would be that, you also see just the internet. Like, if you look at the internet, people were more, concerned with the Kardashians, and, just people. A lot of people are very jaded. So it's hard to make a case when the people that we hang around with, or you hang around with, tends to be different from the actual, common. I don't want to say like doofus or some, say something bad about them. But there's a general ignorance that is prevalent in American society. I feel like that we have to also just pony up. Yeah.
But I think the problem also is, if you really want a simple answer to sort of circle back to the issue of fake news, is that in order to really debunk these popular myths, what you have to do is you have to repeat the truth over and over again. So every time you hear it, you got to just set it straight. That's a lie. Here's the truth. Here's the truth. And you really just sort of beat it home, right? So regardless of one's economic station or anything else, if you hear a lie, you just have to correct it. And eventually, the truth will win out. But that being said, it's like scar tissue, right? So you go back to the AIDS example. If you go to even though the Russians were, the Soviets disavowed the AIDS story, at least Gorbachev did. You still have people like Kanye West, actually referencing the whole AIDS, conspiracy theory in songs, and that played particularly to the issue of racial justice. That you talked about last time, because the belief that the government was effectively infecting African Americans, It's the same thing, right? So the scar tissue remains, but you have to, repeatedly confront this stuff and just say, no, that's a lie. Here's the truth. That's a lie. Here's the truth. So repetition, I think, is key, right? And because that'll have an impact, because the power of a lie is that it's everywhere, right? And if it's everywhere, it sort of becomes the truth. That's what Goebbels said. If you tell a lie long enough, the bigger the lie, it becomes the truth. In the same vein, if you tell the truth enough and confront a lie, eventually, but that compounding effect will take into account. That's shown to be true. I can back that up with like studies and stuff.
I think that's why, like you said earlier, you really fundamentally need good leadership, especially in a time like this where you can't have your own leader being a source of disinformation. Like, you have to have your leader being the one that's hammering the truth home time after time, having the experts come up with him, saying what's true, and just absolutely debunking what's false.
Right, you can't have him saying drink bleach, right? Drink bleach to the public.
But exactly. And so I think that's sort of erratic leadership. And I think what happens is you get what you deserve, right? You get the leaders you deserve. And I think that we have had a low ebb in our political process since since Watergate, really. If you really want to look at it, we've had a low ebb of national leadership since then, and popular distrust in institutions, since the Church Committee, since all the Clinton scandals. And the Iraq War.
Yeah, Fox or CSNBC, CNN, people don't trust either. All these channels.
Well, I think Fox has also cultivated a complete mistrust of national media. I think it's reached a fever pitch under Trump, but I think that they were saying I always call Fox News, and this is I call them the Death Star, because what they did is they took a problem of perceived left-wing bias. And there are all these studies. There's a study in the 90s that actually showed, based on political donations as well as coverage, a lot of the media had sort of a slight left of center bias. And that was the popular narrative, the liberal media. Well, what Fox News did was build an entire alternate echo chamber, which under Trump meant that they were basically echoing his message until it's effectively become right-wing state TV, right? And I mean, so I think that you have, it's a complete media landscape unto itself. Conservative media is itself its own alternate universe with relation to the rest of the media in this country, and I think that you see that, and so they've become a hotbed of half truth, right? I mean, and what's the perverse thing that's taking place is that they've completely warped and reshaped other media in their own image. If you look at CNN and MSNBC, they're following their lead. So you look at Chris Cuomo, you look at Don Lemon, they're completely editorializing news coverage. There's no more. They're not anchors. They're basically bona fide commentators. And so in this way, Fox News has reshaped everything in its own image, and has its own like gravitational pull. And it's interesting to see that take place. And it's impossible for truth to really come out in that environment. When media there's such level of distrust, and B, there's no incentive to tell truth that is inconvenient to political interests.
And the big problem too is like it's all just corporate media now. Like it's the ratings game, and Fox was winning those ratings, so that's why it seems like everybody made that switch. So it's just the fact that we can't trust our own mainstream media. Like,
well,
one of the questions I was going to ask you, like, where do people look now for good information? Do we just have to rely on ourselves doing good research? Like,
no, I think that first off, you have to tune out social media. One of the things you have to do is you have to tune out what you see in your newsfeed, because the algorithms are lying to you. And what I mean by that is that they're tailor-made to fit your own biases and also to inflame you, right? So they're trying to basically There's actually been there's an engineer or early designer of Facebook who's come out against the company saying, we've actually were designed our software to give people a dopamine rush every time they interact with Facebook, right? Every time you get a notification, we want to suck you in. We also want to really trigger a response to a given piece of content. And that's why you see content, some of which excites, some of which really sort of upsets you or makes they're trying to provoke an emotional response and not really engage the more cerebral aspects of the human character. And the best thing to do is to unplug from a lot of the media. The media, even YouTube. I like long form documentaries, but I would say a good place to start would be like PBS, right? And you go from there. And what you do is you just sort of look at both sides of an issue, and you can basically try to look for quality journalism, which exists out there. But you have to look at an issue and sort of research it, right? So give it, maybe a half hour of your time. Watch maybe one newscast, maybe NBC Nightly News, PBS. Give it an hour of your time. Figure out what the issues of the day are, and then read like one article that really vets, that really describes the issue. And be prepared to challenge your own biases. Like the Wall Street Journal is an all right newspaper. It's right of center, but they have perfectly good business journalism. And the same thing is true of the New York Times. I mean, sometimes it feels like a press release from the DNC, but they do check their sources, right? And so you have to really make a judgment. You have to be an informed consumer, but you also need to really spot the obvious fakes. If it's trying to provoke a response, like if it's really trying to piss you off, then you need to sort of distance yourself from it to really intellectually understand a given story. That's the best that I've been able to come up with right now. But giving like an hour of your time to watch a formal news broadcast from sort of a more stale thing like 60 Minutes or PBS NewsHour is a good place to start. And then reading one good article from like the Associated Press or some news outlet like Axios, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, challenge yourself a little bit intellectually. Just step outside your comfort zone. If you're left of center, try something that isn't obscenely like written. Don't write Breitbart, but read something like from the Wall Street Journal and see whether or not it challenges your preconceptions. That's the only way you can really get anywhere. You have to challenge yourself intellectually to really understand an issue and understand your own biases. That's really the goal of fake news, because what they do is they're trying to get you to not question it, right? So to drink the Kool-Aid and accept the lie wholeheartedly without actually critically evaluating the information. So you have to sort of inoculate yourself.
Right. And misinformation may, ironically serve us to improve the public's critical thinking and skepticism. Up to this point, we've had such a dilution of truth in propaganda and individual narratives that it's been easy to eat it up without thinking much over it.
Oh, yeah. Well, because we absolutely. I think that it started with Edward Bernays in the 20th century in particular, Sigmund Freud's relative. And what he did is he, basically realized that in order to control human behavior in the way, you had to provoke responses in the subconscious. And this is the thing that his uncle, Sigmund Freud, had tried to understand, the human subconscious. And he thought, how about we put these ideas into practice, right? And so instead of informing people and saying, oh, this is why a given product or service or policy is good for you on an intellectual, cerebral level, what he realized is you had to provoke a feeling, right? And so that's where you have the beginning of modern day advertising, and we see the results and the long legacy of that in not only in like modern commercials, but in press coverage, in human interest stories, but also in our news feeds, right? It's not just about educating you. They're not just trying to tell you to do something. They're trying to appeal to you on a subconscious level to make you to obtain your acquiescence, right? And I think that people don't give Bernays enough credit for his influence over our political process, because he believed that he was trying to channel the sort of more baser impulses in mass psychology, but at the same time, in the modern era, those have been completely warped to either unleash them in the way that we are now with regards to division, but also to control us, right? To make decisions that are manifestly against our interests. Bernays was the founder of modern day public relations, and his efforts in the groundwork he laid is the reason that so many people buy into political candidates or policies that are manifestly against their own political and economic interests.
All right, I think that's all the time we have for today. We'll catch you next time with a new episode. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for being on,
Jerry,
Jerry.
for joining us.
Thank you.